At the 2018 LA Auto Show, Porsche introduced the all-new 992 generation 911, and with that, they also introduced its starting price, which, hint hint, is very expensive. In this video, we're going to explain exactly what it is that you get for your money, and at the end of this video, I'm going to give you my good, bad, and weird on the all-new 992 generation 911. Now, I know you guys are thinking to yourselves, okay, why is this 22-year-old kid trying to tell me about the new 911? But do trust me, because my grandfather owned multiple 911s. They've been in my family for a long, long time, and I do know a thing or two about Porsches. So, let's get started. They introduced two models. The first is the Carrera S, which starts at $113,200, and the Carrera 4S, which is the all-wheel drive version that starts at $120,600. There's two important caveats to that new starting price, and the first one is that these starting prices are for PDK models only. PDK is Porsche's dual clutch transmission. It stands for Porsche Doppelkupplungsgetriebe. I don't speak German, give me a second here. I translated this on Google. We'll have Google tell us.
Porsche Doppelkupplungsgetriebe.
That is what a PDK is. It's an 8-speed dual clutch transmission, but the other important piece of information about this is that that starting price is about $5,000 more than the previous generation 911 with the PDK. Oh, and by the way guys, we're going to be doing videos like this anytime a new car comes out. As soon as we get the information on the press release from the manufacturer, we're going to be laying out the information like this, telling you everything you need to know, and giving you some of our own opinions on what we think of new vehicles. So, if you like this format, please tell us that down below in the comments as well. First, we should talk about styling, because one of the first things you notice when you walk up to this new 911 is how it looks, because they have redesigned it for the new model year, and it looks a little bit different. Now, obviously, it's a 911. Porsche's not going to go and reinvent the wheel. McDonald's wouldn't go and change the recipe of the Big Mac, would they? But they have changed a few things. The first thing you notice is the new front fascia. They've given it a slightly different grille and a redesigned hood that has kind of a cool retro cue. But when you head around to the back of the new 911, that's where things get really different, because they added this crazy light bar that is kind of a trend we're seeing in a lot of German cars now, but I know a lot of you guys are going to hate that, and a lot of you guys might kind of like it. So tell me what you think down below. One thing that you might not notice right away, unless you're a big Porsche nerd, is that all of the 992 generation 911s are a wide body. So think of the previous generation GT3, that's a wide body 911. All of the new 992s are wide bodies now. It's a new 911. This is Porsche's flagship sports car. We have to talk about performance because that's super important to the 911's history. So, under the hood, at the back, because it's a 911, is the same 3-liter rear-mounted turbocharged flat six that you would get in the previous generation 911, but they've upped the horsepower a little bit. So now it's going to make 443 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque, which is an increase of 23 more horsepower and 22 more pound-feet of torque. As I already mentioned, it's going to come initially with an 8-speed PDK dual-clutch transmission at launch, but fortunately, I know a lot of you guys are going to want a manual transmission in this car. Porsche has said that they're going to bring the 7-speed manual transmission along. It's just not going to launch with the 7-speed manual transmission. But what does all of this mean for actual real-world numbers? Well, they have given us 0 to 60 times for both the 911 Carrera S and 4S. And what's really cool is they've given us the 0 to 60 times for the Chrono Sport package with launch control, which drops the 0 to 60 time pretty significantly. As you can see, the Carrera S base model so far gets 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. If you get the Chrono Sport package, that goes down to 3.3 seconds. When you get the 4S, you get all-wheel drive. Launch times go down even more, so the base Carrera 4S gets a 0 to 60 time of 3.4 seconds, and when you get the Chrono Sport package on the 4S, it goes all the way down to 3.2 seconds. So somehow, despite only adding 23 horsepower, Porsche has found a way to drop 0.4 seconds off of their 0 to 60 times. For reference, I included the same model 0 to 60 times from the previous generation, and you can see across the board it's a difference of about 0.4 seconds. 3.9 seconds for the Carrera S, it goes down to 3.7 when you get the Chrono Sport package, 3.8 seconds for the 4S, and then down to 3.6 when you get the Chrono Sport package. Now there's one more important thing to talk about in the performance category, because Porsche have added a new feature that's something called wet mode. And you might be thinking, what's wet mode? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's actually just kind of a different traction control system when the car detects that it's wet outside. So Porsche has put acoustic sensors in the wheel wells that listen for wet conditions. When that happens, when the car hears that it's wet outside, well, it changes a few things. The first thing it adjusts is the traction control system. That's pretty obvious, right? But it also adjusts the spoiler level at the back, the rear wing that is, and it adjusts the throttle response. Okay, next let's talk about the interior, because they have gone and updated a bunch of stuff on the inside as well. But there's a few important details I want to point out. And the first big change is actually in the gauge cluster. So Porsche is famous for a lot of certain design touches, right? But the one thing that they've actually kept is that 5-pod gauge cluster, and they still have an analog tachometer in the middle. But what they've changed is the 4 outside pods. So now you have the analog tach in the center, but then those 4 pods on the outside are actually all screen. All right, what is with that little shift knob? Now you guys are looking at this interior and you see this little nubby square thing in the middle and think to yourself, what the heck is that? Why did Porsche do that? Well, there's actually a good reason for that, and I'll touch on it a little bit later. But I will tell you one good thing about it is that it does actually move. Now there's this current trend going on where the gear shifter is like a little toggle switch and it doesn't move, and it's really awkward to use. But this one, I sat in it at the LA Auto Show, and it does actually have different positions for reverse, neutral drive, etc. Don't get too worried about that. The one thing I want to tell you guys about the interior that I found to be really important is the feeling that you have when you get inside. I did hop inside the new 911 at the LA Auto Show, and the initial feeling I got was that it's much more intimate than the previous generation. Something about the way that Porsche has slightly redesigned this new cockpit makes it feel that much more driver-oriented and a little bit less machine-like compared to the old generation. You get in and you feel familiar, you feel purposeful, and you feel really excited to drive this thing really, really fast, because we all know it's going to be a super fast car. Okay, so now that you guys know all the things that make this new 992 911 that much more expensive, I did want to give you my good, bad, and weird based on my first impressions sitting in the car and knowing what I know about it from all the specs that have been released by Porsche. So I can take off this piece of paper and reveal to you guys the good, the bad, and the weird. Now first off, starting with the good, I think styling on this new generation 911 is really good, and there's a couple reasons why. Now the first reason is that I think you can't, as Porsche, go and wildly change the way the 911 looks. It has great proportions, it's an iconic design, and like I said earlier, if McDonald's were to change how the Big Mac was constructed, people would be up in arms, they'd be super upset, it would be no good. And Porsche had to keep the 911 looking pretty similar to how it already looks. Alright, so the bad has to be pricing in my book, because this is a really, really, really expensive car. I mean, you're starting at well over $100,000 for the Carrera S, which, as we already talked about, is about a $5,000 price hike from the previous generation. But I think we can do a little math and figure out a more honest number, because this isn't the base 911. It's the Carrera S, which is a slightly sportier model, and it adds a lot of price on top of the normal Carrera. So, given what we know about the current price of the Carrera and the current price of the Carrera S, I think it'd be a much more fair estimate to say that the 911 should still start under $100,000. Alright, so the weird thing for me on the new generation 911 has to be that shifter. I talked about it a little bit earlier, and it's still weird in my book. I talked to a member of Porsche's PR team and asked them, listen, what's the deal with this new shifter for the PDK? And what they told me was actually a pretty interesting piece of information. They said that their racing drivers in development decided that they just didn't use the shifter in the PDK all that often. Most of them, when they're driving really hard, will use the paddle shifters on the steering wheel, and so Porsche decided that it was time to de-emphasize, that's the word they use, de-emphasize the shifter inside the cabin. That's why this new shifter is so small, so insignificant looking compared to the previous ones. Well, there you go, guys. That is all you need to know about this 992 all-new Porsche 911. Porsche, if you're listening to this, we would love to have one here in Colorado, give it a high elevation test and see what we think of it up here at a mile above sea level. If you guys like this video, please drop a comment down below. Tell us what you think. We of course want to hear everything that you guys have to say about this brand new 911 because it's such an iconic car and I think you guys are going to have a lot of strong opinions about it. Of course, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe and come back to TFLcar.com for the latest news, views, and real world reviews, and of course, more videos on the new 911 should we be able to find one to test.